Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to another Richter Report. And today I wanted to share a book with you that actually came onto my awareness from my daughter. So here's the thing. I recommend every parent do this, and it has nothing to do with the topic today, but throughout the years, whenever one of my three kids came and wanted to read a book, like Harry Potter, Twilight, or The Hunger Games, I always wanted to read it with them or scan it at least before them, because those books have a potential for having a real impact on their psyche, and then being able to talk to them about it, being able to come back and say to them, like, okay, what's troubling you? And if they're having nightmares, being able to identify what is that, what happened there? Why are you triggered by that? I know my own mom did that for me when I read The Diary of Anne Frank, and I was really, really just touched and actually horrified by it. And I had some nightmares after that, that the same thing could continue to happen. And my mom was very good about identifying what it is that I was scared of, because she had that same ancestral trauma for her. And so when we talk about ancestral trauma, like is in the heading of this Richter Report, ancestral trauma, we've all had that grandmother who passes down what we think is superstition at a certain point in our lives. It's actually, science has caught up and calls it epigenetics, that in fact trauma actually is held in our cellular level. And even if it's psychic trauma or spiritual trauma, emotional trauma is actually held in a cellular level and passed on, just like your grandmother's, knobby knees might have been passed on, just like her stories, just like her chicken soup recipe might have been passed on. So is ancestral trauma. And when we're looking today at what's going on in the world, we can't discount that. We can't say, well, let's forget about what happened 400 years ago, because there are remnants of it that are still sitting on a cellular level, and in the stories that we tell, and in the awareness that is passed down. And so when my daughter started reading this book that I'm sharing today, I wanted to read it myself just to see what is it that she's being impacted with, how can I head off some of the things that I might have to explain to her that might be concepts that are a little too grown up for her. Turns out it is beyond a great book. I think that this book should actually be recommended reading. I think that what's going on today will definitely shine a light into what happened not 400 years ago, but as few as 70 years ago, 50 years ago. So the book is called The Forgotten Girl. And it's about a young girl actually, who encounters an unmarked grave and a ghost. So we know at around this age, that sort of 10 to 12 age, grade 4, 5, 6, kids love starting to read ghost stories. I did as well when I was a kid. That's why Harry Potter is such a big deal, that, we continue to return to it. Stephen King, right? Like, sort of, we like to be scared. And so here is this author who did this great job of knowing exactly what kids are into at this age, but also through the story shining a light on the cultural implications, the historic implications. A little girl who was buried in a segregated grave. And those segregated graves had unmarked tombstones. And this is as recently as the 1960s. This is the same generation, like the Ruby Bridges, who were the first ones to desegregate schools and the first ones kind of making waves and having, really shining a light on that civil rights to be civil and non-segregate. But a lot of these segregated cemeteries were forgotten about. And there was so much folklore and so much superstition that went into these ghosts returning and having their revenge, these ghosts coming back to be remembered. Because over the years, those unmarked gravestones and forgotten cemeteries were razed and turned into strip malls and condominium buildings, and never really given the acknowledgement. A lot of times the tombstones weren't even marked, or they would be marked, let's say, just by the first name, because the last names were forgotten. And so here is this story written for children, or for that grade 5, hello, hi, that grade 4, 5, 6 age. where a ghost has come back to seek revenge or to seek remembrance, and how that looks to children, and how important it is to remember the stories of the people who passed, and how it looks to children today who are advocates, who we are raising a whole generation of kids who are watching what we're doing. They're taking notes. They're looking at what it is. How are we showing up in the world today? Because we are here making history, and we've got to be on the right side of history, and remember the history so that we can move forward from it, so that we can have that epigenetic link, have that cellular memory, that ancestral trauma, so that we can heal it in order to move past it. You know, this book had a grandmother in it called Suga. And Suga reminds me a lot of my grandmother Tova, who also told these great stories, but was also very, very scared of the past. And who also created the world so scared of repeating the past that, of living through the past, that in fact she didn't live at all. Now, these superstitions, or what we consider grandmother's superstitions, actually today, science is catching up and giving them a name, and knowing that these grandmother's superstitions are in fact science. We actually have data and research and proof of what happens inside our bodies, what happens in our psyches, what happens in our, what they call the folklore, the folk awareness, the cultural awareness that we pass on. So the Forgotten Girl takes a look at that folklore and that folk awareness and talks about the things that are uncomfortable to talk about. The things that we have continued to perpetuate over the last 50, 60, 70 years without even realizing it. And now, wake up. It's time to start talking about it. It's time to start looking at it. It's time to start letting our kids read books, inquire, research into what happened and why was there a whole generation of people that were forgotten and that their stories have been forgotten. And now it's time to be remembered. Remember when you got scholastic books when you were a kid? Pick up The Forgotten Girl, because this will revolutionize. And I'm sure it's going to be actually a movie. It's got that horror, creepy power to it. So watch out for that. And parents, recommend this to your kids. Buy this for your kids. Buy this for yourself. It's such a great book. And then leave me a message in my inbox. I want to hear, what do you think would be the book that I'm going to choose for tomorrow that had the biggest cultural significance on my own life, and actually set me on the path to want to be an author? Put it in the comments or in the private message. I'm happy to hear. I want to hear your opinion. What single book, single author's voice set me on my path? I still have her inscribed, her comment inscribed, and I gave you a hint. It's a female. Until next time, write on, read on. See you tomorrow.